real quick. Excellent. All right, welcome everyone to our remote working and technology session. And I just wanted to start by giving some of the guidelines for our meeting today. If you've participated already today, you know that we want to keep cameras off unless you're on the panel, and microphones are going to be disabled during our session until we get to the question and answer side. So use the chat to ask questions or to give comments, and during the Q&A, you can also raise your hand, use that feature to have your microphone enabled, or you can ask your question in the chat. So just as a reminder, this is being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want others to hear later. All right, so thanks for joining. And so I'm Jennifer Mackin, and I have been focused on leadership development most of my career. And I love the challenge of figuring out what leaders need, different needs, to reach their potential in their careers. And, you know, the challenge of the fact that none of us have ever arrived when it comes to leadership. It's not a box we can just check, but it's complex. And then you layer on top of that what's going on in our landscape today, the business world we're in, and it just makes things more fun. And I do find it fun and challenging, and so I look forward to learning every day. And I'm the moderator of the session today, of the remote but connected, and talking about culture. And so I just wanted to share what we're going to do here. Is I was going to set the stage, give you my perspective on this topic a little bit, then go into introductions of the rest of the panel and questions. So that is the plan, and we're all excited to be here. So I work for Oliver Group, Leadership Pipeline Institute, and I had the pleasure of working with hundreds of leaders, thousands of leaders, hundreds of companies every year. So I have the pulse, I guess, of what's going on. And the biggest stressor today that I'm hearing, and I'm talking to a lot of them, is this remote work. Because I think we feel like we've gotten some of the hard stuff behind us. It's in our rear view mirror a little bit more now. And yet there are new challenges that are kind of coming our way. We're still needing to adapt quite frequently. And so, you know, C-suite, CEOs, leaders are stressed about this, but employees are also stressed and worried and wondering, you know, what's going to happen. And so that anxiety is there, and burnout that we've all experienced, I think. Well, studies show over 50% of us have felt this burnout concept. And so it's just difficult right now. And so I think focusing on this topic is going to pay big dividends for all of us. So I'm really glad that everybody has joined today. So why do we care? Why should we care about this topic? Let's start with that and outcomes for what we're talking about today. And a couple of months ago, I did a radio show, and I talked about, I think there's going to be an exodus of people. And Microsoft actually and others have come out with their thoughts on this, and have agreed with me that, you know, many of you that are listening may have thought about, what am I going to do next? Rethinking their whole career, rethinking what they're working on, rethinking what their family needs. There's so much change going on, and a bit of frustration, but also opportunities. So I think this is something that we need to all consider. Secondly, we've got decreased engagement. So I told you about the people feeling burnout. I think it's about 57% on average are feeling some burnout. And what we know is those who are burned out 4 times as likely to leave organizations. So there's still a war for talent, even though a lot of people, you know, our unemployment is up, but also employees have confidence to leave now. So in the end, you know, we want to keep these things from happening. Why? Because we have to have our people connected in so that we can reach our business strategies. And that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying every day to keep working harder and harder to make sure that we're successful, the companies are successful, our teams are successful. So people feeling good about the culture and how they're working with their colleagues is critical. So I see this as a leadership challenge. Of course I would, right? And leaders as a whole are really not ready for this coming crisis, the past crisis, what we're going to have coming in the future. And I know that because I ask CEOs, I'll say, are your leaders prepared, right? Are they prepared for the world we're in today or what's coming? And often the answer is either no, I don't think they are, or I don't know. And so where else in our business would we allow that to stay as our answer and not figure out some other solutions for this? So I think leaders, and I know there's a lot of you listening today, we have to get back to basics. We have to get back to connecting people to the work, coaching, setting up, what our expectations are, and setting an environment where we can interact and as I said, coach, give feedback, ask questions about what they need more often today than ever. So hopefully I built a bit of a case for us to have this conversation, and we are fortunate to have 3 leaders with me who are passionate about this topic, passionate about what they do, really coming at this with 3 different vantage points. So I want to get to you guys introducing yourselves, and then we'll go into the questions. So if we could start, Darrin, can we start with you with your introduction and a little bit about yourself?
Yep, sounds great. Thanks, Jennifer. Great introduction. So my name is Darrin Murriner. I am the co-founder and CEO of Cloverleaf. We are a technology startup that is scaling coaching across the enterprise using integrated coaching opportunities and tools like Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Teams, Slack, and Google for Business. And our focus is really on bringing connections in the context of the team environments people work in. So we've had a front row seat to this long before COVID kind of pushed us all remote in the past year. And our focus is really on drawing connection and relationship in the context of work. So really excited to have this conversation today and really excited to chat with the other great panelists.
Thanks, Darrin. Appreciate that. Charley, how about you? Can you give your introduction?
Sure. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. I'm Charley Miller.
You are.
Great. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the founder of Unitonomy and OrgVitals. OrgVitals is a system for culture consultants to run their practice and assess cultures and understand what needs to be improved to work with leadership. I've been building remote teams for over a decade. In my last startup, Touchcast, we scaled over 100 people in 7 different time zones and had struggles figuring out how to adapt a remote first culture long before remote was really a thing. But we clearly saw the advantages of having a large team be adaptable and flexible, whether it was saving overhead or just the fact that we were really nimble, fast in our development. And we realized we were really productive in this manner, as I'm sure a lot of people have discovered now in the last year. And when I think about remote culture, I think Darrin used a phrase that I love, which is like connectedness. And when you think about what connectedness between employees really means, it's always about trust. I think a lot of companies didn't go remote before the pandemic because they were worried that when people went to their homes to work, they wouldn't be productive. And when you have cultures that are remote first and you build that trust in, you can have really motivated, really productive people because there's a sense of autonomy in their space, and they're adaptable and they're flexible. And I'm sure we'll get all into this, but it's easier said than done.
Right. Thanks, Charley. Appreciate that intro. And Gauri, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hey guys, I'm Gauri Bhalerao. I work as Director of Infrastructure and Strategy for Yum Brands, which is the parent company for Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC, and our newest sister brand, Habit Burger. So my area of focus for past couple of years have been collaboration and communication, along with the other pieces that come with infrastructure. So what we have seen in past 2 or 3 years, right? This place is rapidly changing, and being a global organization, I think it becomes really important for us to be connected, right? And that's where kind of we are coming from, having our presence in almost 100 countries. I think we have to be very connected with each other, right? So that being the forefront, but the technology has changed so much, right? So that has been our focus for past few years. And even though we went remote last year, I think we have been working as organization, we have been working in this space for some time. As the pandemic made us switch to 100% remote all the time, I think what we have realized, a lot of the organizations were already there. It was not just full time, right? So I think it's that change or the switch that needs to happen, and that is here. And I think this hybrid work culture that we are looking at, right? Because frankly, it's not going to be business as usual, right? I mean, we can lament about, oh, we would love to travel for work and it needs to be business as usual. But I think within past 1 year, things have changed so drastically. The way we look at things, the way we work together, the whole collaboration piece of it has just improved tremendously, right? So how do we incorporate that in our culture, right, is something that we have been very keenly focusing on. For Yum, culture is the biggest piece. And we have a very unique collaborative culture. So being in this space, it gives us this unique opportunity to figure out what this means for us. What does future of work mean for our employees? And how can, for us, first and foremost, it's going to be how can we be more inclusive? As a leader, this is a unique opportunity for us to define what that means, right? And how many times as leaders have we had that chance to have that paradigm shift, right? So really, this is exciting times for all of us to figure out what does this mean? What are we going to do with this unique opportunity?
Right, right, wow. So you can see the passion that everybody has, and you know, we've got such different types of organizations and roles that you all play, and you know, you heard some of my reasoning for why we should care about this topic. So I'm curious, Darrin, if you can share just some of your thoughts of, you know, why is this important, but what's your reasoning for being passionate about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm passionate about cultures in general, right? I think long before 2020, and I think that's sounds like a common theme with everybody on this panel today. And I think, you know, really, when I think about Cloverleaf's mission, right, which is to help people do their best work, how you do that is all aspects of culture, not just the fixed environment of the physical office spaces that we're at. And so for that reason, we've kind of been focused in on this for a while, right? How do we create the environment that is going to be most suitable for the people that are in our teams and in our organization? So our focus, again, is really on helping people do their best work, and culture is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's kind of what you do too, you know, it kind of summarizes what you do. Charley, can you add on to that?
The unmute thing. I've got 2 little kids running around, so you know, one of the perks of working remotely is you get the intrusions from time to time, and I love that. My daughter goes to kindergarten next year, and I think I'll miss that a lot. But let's be honest, in this last year, this was such a dramatic change for people that that work-life balance we've been talking about for decades, right? Those things got smushed together. There really was no difference between work and life. They're on top of each other. And we've all adapted now, and I think there's a lot of benefits to that world. And I've been passionate about this space because, like I said, I've been doing this for so long. I realized a long time ago, wow, when I have the flexibility from work at home, everything really changes in terms of how I program my day. I'm not wasting time commuting and all this stuff. And to Gauri's point, wow, what an opportunity it is now for so many companies to sort of awaken to this moment and realize they can really reinvent their culture. Leaders can realize this is a fantastic opportunity, not a burden, but you can really weaponize your culture to be highly productive, higher performing. And I think that's where Darrin and I come at it from the ways we are offering tools to assess things so that leaders can really understand from a data-driven approach how things can improve, how people can work at their best.
Right, right. Right. Well, and Gauri, you showed your passion already in your introduction, but is there anything you want to add to kind of why this topic? Why is this important to you?
I think as I mentioned earlier, right, I think even though we were thrust into it, it's really important for us to be successful as leaders, as individuals, and for our organizations to be successful, right? think collaboration is the key piece, building those relationships. It becomes more and more important. And it's not just with your teams, but outside your organizations too, right? So I think that's where my passion is, around building those relationships and figuring out how do we become more productive, right? How do we help each other and work together to achieve those goals that we all want to achieve as a business, as an individual, as a team.
Right. So this topic is affecting every one of us who are working and leading within organizations, and kind of top of mind right now. And so if you could start by sharing with everyone, Gauri, if you would start with, how do you define a strong remote culture? And maybe when do we know if there's a problem within our culture?
I think for any culture, right, and especially remote culture, communication is the key piece. As leaders, I think it's going to be very important for us to make sure that we are communicating in an effective way. Frankly, previously we used to have water cooler talks, right, and catch up with each other while we are walking, or we'll have meetings after meetings. But this new remote culture is going to be very different. And that's where, as leaders, we get to kind of focus on what that means and why it is important, because I think the world has become smaller in past 1 year, right? And as that happens, how we lead our teams, and it becomes more and more important to build that culture of inclusivity, right? Making sure that everybody is included, everybody is effective, and everybody gets a chance. And I think that's one of the reasons this is really important for us to build this work culture, again, to be effective. And being the leaders, it becomes our job to make sure that we help our employees get there.
Jennifer, I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I had the same problem, Charlie. Sorry. Okay, let me start over with that. Gauri, I was just saying that, you come from a unique, bigger culture where you are global and where communication, hearing from everyone, hearing their voices was really important. So you've been kind of dealing with some of these challenges that some of us are just dealing with more currently. So thanks for that perspective. And Charlie, what is your thoughts on how do we know if we have a strong remote culture?
Yeah, so everything from emotional stress, we talk about the team Slack, Zoom fatigue stuff that's going on. There's emotional safety issues with people. We're talking about creating more inclusive environments, rightfully. But now that you have all these technical systems in the way of how we connect, you have to make sure there's equity across those and people still have opportunities to advance their voice. That's tricky. When you think about communication, you have to consider things like processes, systems, habits. All those things need to be considered as you develop a remote strategy. The trick is, how do you know to analyze those indicators? And one thing I'm always preaching is that you just need to listen. And that comes in many ways, of course, but great leaders need to adapt to be able to listen to people and understand their needs and how they're feeling about things so that you can adjust on the fly. No one's going to have a perfect remote strategy out of the gate, and certainly no one had that a year ago when the pandemic started to unfold. I think we're all learners right now, but when you start listening to your teams and you understand your own unique culture, good leaders will adapt to that. And people feel better when they just know that they're being listened to. That's half the battle here. When leaders are connecting to everyone, that's obviously the first bridge of building the connection that Gauri's been pointing to.
Right. This concept of emotional safety is kind of new, kind of interest. It's very interesting in the sense of we've never had to worry so much as leaders about people's emotional well-being. We should have, but probably more than ever, we've realized, okay, this whole, they're all together, personal and work, and we have to focus on that. But I love also the aspect of listening because of that. Leaders need to listen and have this two-way communication where it's been more directive in the past. Darrin, what about you? What are your thoughts going to you on this?
Yeah, I'll add to, I mean, we've all used the word inclusive or inclusion. And I think one of the nice things actually about kind of being forced remote is that it really kind of highlighted these places where we haven't had inclusive cultures, or we haven't, another way to say that that's kind of gaining a lot of traction, right, is belonging, or a sense of belonging in the context of the teams or the cultures that we're a part of. And I think what's great about that is it's bringing some of these other hidden issues that were below the surface really to the forefront. Because if you have this place where all of a sudden the playing field is at least a little bit leveled from the standpoint of, we're all on Zoom, we're all struggling with, kids running into the screen, we're trying to balance work and life and kids education, it to some degree it's forced us to empathize with people and situations where maybe we haven't been as inclusive in the past. And it's forced us to be more intentional and more thoughtful, right? So I think part of the conversation that you're hearing here today is, listening and understanding what people's unique needs are. Suddenly, I think, especially for leaders where maybe in the past they've been able to just kind of, excuse certain people or certain behaviors away in a team context, you can't do that anymore, right? Because how are you going to collaborate? How are you going to communicate if you're not creating a space for that? And let me just tell a really quick anecdote. We have a young lady who was an intern with us who actually just took on a full-time role with us. And, every week we have a 30-minute touch base with our sales team. And she's a part of what we consider our customer team. And she came to me after a few of these meetings. She's like, hey, I really feel like not everyone gets an opportunity to contribute in this conversation, right? We have a lot of really strong, kind of dominant personalities in this team environment. And our focus is on getting through all of the agenda items that we have for that 30-minute session. And what it's done is really crowded that out. And what I did is just gave her an opportunity to just speak to that at the next meeting. And she was brave and really kind of like offered her perspective on what that feels like for her. And it really kind of gave us an opportunity to step back and say, hey, how do we create space for, not just this person, but other people on our team who don't have the opportunity to contribute? And, what are we missing out on by not giving her an opportunity to speak up in that context? And so I think that's just a small example, but I think it's really highlighting a lot of those situations where people, especially as leaders, can create a place where people can offer their best and contribute their best, even in on a screen.
Well, that's a great leadership example, and I have a feeling you guys have some response to that too, because diversity inclusion is a part of this. And so, anything else you guys want to add?
I think as we have become this one huge global organization now, right? It's not US or a market, a UK, it's all a global organization. The equity, equality, and access has become more and more important. And as leaders, I feel some of the traditional leadership practices that we have learned, we will have to unlearn those things, right? Because it's all about flexibility. It's not about achieving results at any cost. The human factor of it is becoming more and more important. And I think as we became remote, and Darrin, to what you said, right, as we became remote, right, this human factor has come to the forefront. You're not leaders, but first of all, you're humans, and everybody is struggling with the same kind of issues. And that's where I think it becomes really important for us to take into account that human factor as we build our cultures and as we build this new culture where it's a marriage of culture and technology, right? Where we'll be using technology to connect with each other, whether casually or at a professional level.
I'll add to that. The culture is never done. And I think in the context of inclusion and opportunity, that's never done either. And you can be assessing your people regularly with pulse surveys and stuff, which we recommend. And you might look at the averages and say, hey, we're doing pretty good, but it's very, very important to understand inclusion has to work on an individual basis. There might be one person who doesn't feel included, doesn't feel like they have the opportunities. they feel on the fringe for some reason, they're not accepted for some reason, it's very important to reach out to that person and know that that's happening. They may not be a brave one, like Darrin was referencing, that can speak up. And that's why it's so important to make sure you have some systems in place that can help you monitor on an employee by employee basis how people are feeling about the conditions.
Yeah, I would just add too that, you know, this is a leadership focus area for most organizations now, and it ties into every aspect and should be tied into the plan at the same time. And when you think about how we work, who we work with, what we're working on, inclusion, equity, diversity, all of that should be considered as we go, because I've seen so many initiatives where it's more of a one-time thing, that a training or something, and that's what's not working. But we have an opportunity now as leaders, as we think about how we work, how we interact, communicate, we have an opportunity now to make some change there, a unique opportunity. All right, we can keep going on this if you want. So if you have something, please jump in. But I'm curious if you could share with everyone your thoughts on when making these decisions right now about how we have to work, because some larger companies in particular are saying, I have to take a stand sometime on this, or give some guidance anyway on how we're going to do this. But what are your thoughts as they make decisions? What should they be thinking about? I guess I'll go right to Charley first. I haven't had you start first.
Sure. I was in New York for 10 years and so I have a lot of relationships up there. And I'm hearing so many people ditching their offices in Manhattan. And there was an article in the New York Times last week about 85% of the offices in New York haven't come back yet. And that's driving some of my friends in corporate office space management nuts, because they're very worried. What's happening in Manhattan? Nobody knows. Where you have sky high overhead when it comes to office rent. That's different in Louisville, Kentucky, where things are cheaper, and you can definitely have a flexible thing where you do have an office. Maybe people go there a few times a week for important collaborations. But I don't know, in the bigger cities, we might be seeing a much stronger take toward permanent remote cultures.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone truly knows where the puck is going with all this, but I think you're going to see a whole spectrum of different cultures emerge. And I think the one true thing, though, for any 21st century culture, you have to embrace autonomy within all of this. You have to trust your people. And I'm really hoping that we're going to see more and more of that, because those are the cultures that are going to thrive.
Yeah, one of the questions in the chat was really about, do we see leaders saying this is an opportunity to get rid of real estate? This is an opportunity to cut costs. And I just want to point out that, at least from my experience of talking to companies we work with, I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing we need to revisit what our space looks like. We need to be listening to our employees and finding out what they need, and then make decisions. And great, if we can save money, we're going to shift it over to helping with these types of situations, providing leaders what they need, providing technology that we need, and really creating this culture. So just to kind of give my perspective on that question there. Darrin, how about you?
Yeah, I would echo what Charley said. I mean, I think, you know, and this should have been the case, you know, pre-COVID, but listening to what our employees' needs are, right? Like how many companies did not provide flexible work arrangements before COVID, and now it's a necessity. It should have been a necessity 5 years ago, or potentially 10 years ago, assuming we had the technical infrastructure to support that. But so that doesn't change. And I think, you know, as Charley mentioned, hey, for a lot of places, especially maybe outside of those really large mega cities, where it's a bit more accessible to still get into the office, you know, creating that space where people can come in, you know, regardless of whether or not you're a remote first company, I think is still helpful. I think the other really important piece is really creating an expectation that meetings are digital first, right? So if you schedule a meeting, especially in this hybrid space where we have some people coming back, some people remote permanent, you know, where organizations are thinking more broadly about hiring remote and distributed first, When you schedule that meeting, making sure that you include that Zoom or Microsoft Teams link, making sure that you include or set up a space like on Miro for collaboration, and not just expect that, hey, we're going to do this on a whiteboard, and hey, sorry for you people who are remote and aren't co-located. I don't think that's going to fly, and I think you need to be planning or preparing for kind of the lowest common denominator or highest common denominator, whichever way you look at it, so that you're creating a space. And I know, again, back to that inclusion word, right? Inclusion isn't just in a DE&I context, but it is also just making sure that you create a place where everyone can collaborate and can contribute, and give their best work, whether they're physically present or whether they're digitally present.
I love that. And Ronald, who's listening, said, that we should be focusing on our collaboration all the time, right? All interactions, instead of this just, we're going to go to the office and collaborate. And maybe there's opportunities to get together for lots of reasons, but it's not just to be innovative or collaborate. We have to be able to do that, leveraging the digital world that we're in, like you're saying, Darrin. Gauri, what are some of your thoughts to add to what they're saying?
So definitely, as Darrin said, right, the collaboration piece is going to be an integral part of what we do, who we are. And I think for organizations too, right, one size does not fit all. So what kind of culture are you going to build? Is it all going to be remote? Is it all going to be in person or a hybrid work culture? So each organization, depending on the shapes and sizes, what industry you are in, what are the unique needs of the organization, that should define, and that's how it's going to be defined going forward, right? So there'll be times when I can see you want to have everybody in the office for a week to focus and get something done, but after that, it could be more flexible, right? So depending on what's going on, what are the needs, that's how things are going to work. And again, the whole flexibility piece of it is going to be key, right? In this new digital world, you got to be collaborating. You will have to use technology for everything we do. I think it's not a question anymore of, are we going to use the technology? That's how we work, right? It's integral part of who we are as an organization, how we succeed as an organization, and the success of our relationships, our businesses, and our teams is going to depend on how effectively we use this technology. Right, right. I mean, what I'm hearing all of you say is this is really a chance for a fresh slate, opportunity to create something new, opportunity to ask your team members what will work for them, what has worked. And so it's a really exciting time. Do you all have any additional tools or thoughts on really building relationships, having meaningful conversations remotely? I mean, we're hiring people remotely. Some people will now say, I've never met my colleagues. That was true for a few organizations. Now it's true for many. So what are your thoughts on how to do that? Gauri. Okay, Charley.
Okay, sure. So I think there's like a whole new world of etiquette that we have to embrace. And I think every company needs to almost put this in writing, especially for new hires, so they understand the kind of remote etiquette of this company's culture. That's things like, it's okay to have your camera off in all of our video conferencing. Hey, phone calls are actually okay, especially for one-on-ones. We don't have to be doing everything on video conferencing all the time. That's exhausting, especially for an introvert like me. I think you got to understand what's required when it comes to communication, especially proactive communication, a lot of documentation, tools like Murriner that Darrin referenced, or freehand, things to whiteboard together so it feels like you're in the same place. Recording videos and sharing it to someone, and really embracing asynchronous work. I use a tool called Loom all the time where I can just make a quick video memo to my team that's 5 minutes long, and I know they'll watch it hours later. We don't have to all be present for every meeting. In fact, I would say in my company, 75% of our meetings are asynchronous at this point by sharing videos and documentation, and it's fantastic. We've really learned how to do that well. I'm sure you all have a lot more ideas on this, but so tools matter, but also the habits matter here, and embracing etiquette so everyone's kind of building this around the same habits.
I love that. Embrace the etiquette. I love all of what you're saying. Gauri, how about you? Jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what Charlie said, right? Tools, you can use any tool, really, whether it's Zoom or Teams or Slack or Teams chat. I think all of the tools will work effectively if you have that culture of collaboration, right? Again, it goes back to those building those relationships, working together, and all of that is how you build this new culture, and tools are going to be a means to achieve those, right?
Right.
And again, one size doesn't fit all. Use the tool that works best. A lot of times, I mean, even though we try to standardize, a lot of times there are times when, you know what, for this particular thing, this tool is not going to work because we need to be more collaborative. We need to use this particular functionality of a tool to make it more effective. And have seen people being creative, uh, creative and creatively using tools to achieve the goals. So again, it's up to individuals, right? And it's not just up to the leaders to identify the tools and say, hey, you know what, use this tool. It's up to the employees too to suggest. So I think it's going to be, here is where that culture is going to play a very important role, that inclusiveness, right? Where the employees feel comfortable to speak up and tell their leadership that, hey, you know what, we have better tools, guys. Let's use this tool instead of that.
Right.
So that becomes more and more important, the variety and what tool to use when.
Right.
So again, one
Right.
size doesn't fit all, and that adaptability piece and that flexibility is going to be so key.
And the communication, always back to that, right? Of, let's talk to each other. It's not just a leader's responsibility. I think that's true of all of this. Building the culture is employees' responsibility, as well as finding tools, as well as figuring out what the etiquette should be. There's just so many things there. Darrin, it's hard to go last on a question, but share your thoughts in addition to what they've said.
Yeah, well, I love how Charlie said that, right? It's tools and habits. And I think it's a combination of those things. I mean, on the tool side, I would love to, obviously put a plug in or a pitch for Cloverleaf, because that helps people build those authentic relationships, even in a digital world. But I think the other, the important word that I think I use when I talk about this in this context is the intentionality. And I think the key thing is leaders and even individual members of the team just have to be very intentional. And so some of the ways that we've done that is, we have dedicated time for us to build our relationships with each other. We do a Wednesday lunch, and it's kind of a retrospective for our entire week, where people can talk about the good, the bad, and the meh of the stuff that's happening in their life, right? And whether that's personal or it's business related, we break out into small groups. We can share some of the more personal stuff and deal with whether it's the loneliness or the disconnectedness, but also then share that with a larger group and being intentional around those kinds of things. I think other things, and Charlie mentioned this a little bit as well, is, hey, maybe I just have a dedicated time where I'm driving from point A to point B, or I'm running some errands, and it's like, hey, drop something on Teams or Slack to say, hey, I've got this half-hour time block if anyone wants to connect on a personal level, right? But that requires a level of intentionality that I don't think we're always used to, unless you're like Charlie and have spent the last 10 years of your life working remote. I think for people who've just started to go remote, that level of intentionality is probably not something they're comfortable with or familiar with.
Darrin, you make really good points. One of the things that we have started doing more and more, there are a few people that you used to connect all the time, right? You used to have lunch with, but now you only see them, or a lot of times it was just hallway conversations. You will meet with them and you'll have like 20 minutes conversation. And those are the things that people miss. So what we have realized that it's okay. So there are a couple of times when with a couple of my coworkers, we turned that, hey, regular meeting time into a catch-up time, and just talk about kids, talk about what's going on in each other's world, what is working, what is not. And those casual interactions are going to be really important. It's especially, you mentioned, there are a lot of people who have joined organizations in past 1 year where they haven't seen their coworkers, right? So how do you build relationship with them? So I can give you an instance where it worked out really well organically for us. So last year we started the Women in Technology group here at Yum. And what we realized was there was a group of women who had never met women from other part of the organization, right? So there was this, hey, they knew each other, the 15, 20 women that they knew, but the other 60 they didn't. So for them, they're like, hey, I need to work with all of these women, but I don't know how to connect with them. So it was more of a, hey, let's just get together. It doesn't have to be a very formal event. Let's just get together, have a networking session, and then have 10 minutes of introduction and then just breakout sessions. I think the breakout rooms is a fantastic tool that I'm absolutely loving using. I think some of these tools are very key to the success of how we work together, right? And how do you make it meaningful? And what Darrin mentioned, right? That intentionality, I think that's going to be the key piece when you break out into these rooms, whether it's when we are having HR conversations as a team, how to improve, or working on solutioning something, right? As technology architects, whatever problem you're trying to solve, right? Initially, we used to get into the smaller groups. That's exactly what we can do so effectively, very effectively using the technology now.
Yeah, I've seen that be the only way certain individuals are going to speak up, are going to share their thoughts. Otherwise, they're quiet in a bigger setting. Charley, did you have something you want to add?
Oh, I'm just having some flashbacks from my days at TouchCast where we had 7 different time zones around the world. And I think you guys have great advice, being intentional, make sure you have the bonding moments, have mentors too, especially again for the quiet people. So their voice is being heard by at least somebody and they're getting cultivated into the culture more and more. But time zones are a real challenge for this. If you're in a big company, we made the mistake of having too many meetings at one point. We were trying to overcompensate for the communication breakdowns we were experiencing. And then we looked up and realized we're not getting anything done. This is just meeting fatigue at this point. And that was even a lot of in-person meetings for our New York team. And we had to really reevaluate how we were operating and reinvent our processes and our habits. And it was tough, but we eventually leaned more toward asynchronous. And one of the big benefits of an asynchronous culture in terms of communication is it's more inclusive to people across all around the world when you have large teams. So just take a note on that and make sure that when you're developing your culture, you're considering all the craziness of the different time schedules and where the overlap is and where it's not.
I think we've talked a little bit about the pace of technology and how new things are being developed all the time. And the existing technology is getting better and better. I don't know, Darrin, about Cloverleaf. I'm sure you're making all different kinds of changes there. But speak to, if you could, how do we keep up with all of this? How do we know what's coming? How do we know what's out there? How can we share it? And in addition to that, there was a question in the chat just about if you could share other tools outside of Zoom and Slack, Microsoft Teams that you've used. Cloverleaf's one. So if you could go to that too. Darrin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the ones that we've mentioned up to this point, I mean, Miro, I think has obviously gained a lot of traction. I think for people who are used to putting sticky notes on a whiteboard, right? And there are other tools in that space. I think before that, Trello, whether it was task management, to-do lists, how do we stay connected? There are other great tools as well that integrate with Slack or Teams that help you be more productive or more collaborative. And Cloverleaf has an app as well that integrates with those tools. But I mean, there are plenty of other ones like Donut and others. And I would just recommend looking at marketplaces as a really good place to start. So G2, which I call Yelp for enterprise technology, you can look at the engagement category on there and just click through. I think it's very full featured, and you can identify that. Attending webinars like this, right? Just having conversations with other leaders, whether they're in your local or regional area, or just even digitally on different groups or different digital communities.
Charley?
Yeah, I'll add one quick
Gauri?
tip. Like for all the people stuck in Teams and Slack, use threads. It's like such an easy trick. If you can get people to adapt a habit of using threads where it's almost like the thing you post in the main channel is the subject line of an email, and then have the conversation really in the thread. That way you don't have 90% of your workforce having to read through meaningless messages that don't really pertain to their work. That's like a really quick win for groups to just get better about using some really powerful tools. But that said, I also don't think that Microsoft Teams and Slack is the end all be all of a good remote communication. They're really not. They can often make things even worse, and they can be a Pandora's box for the wrong culture. Use those intentionally, and realize that sometimes a 5-minute phone call is a really quick way of saving people 80 Slack messages or Microsoft Teams messages.
Good point.
Yeah.
Charley, I was pandering to the sponsor, so I mean, you know, thanks for bailing me out on that.
Yeah, there's some other good ones in the chat as well, but Gauri, what would you say?
So my take on this is within last year, especially within last 1 year, there are so many new tools that have emerged, right, that are helping us enhance this whole experience. Right. I think it's not just collaboration, but it's the whole collaboration experience. What we are talking about is your user experience, right? And Jennifer, you and I have talked about this using the whole virtual reality space, right? There are so many different tools that are coming up. Couple of days back, I was testing some of the tools like Pluto, where you can reimagine how your meeting, what your surrounding in a meeting looks like, right? And that is where I think there is so much going on. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out and how we can use those tools to change the way we work, the way we collaborate, right? Because I think that is just the whole virtual reality field is going to be very fascinating to watch, because the use cases that are coming up and how people are using them to creatively make things work or make things a little bit different than how things have been done traditionally, right? It's going to be very important. So hang tight. There are not just the ones that we have seen so far, but the ones that are coming are going to be really important.
Right. Right. And the chat is just really slamming on some of our younger generation folks who might be joining. But to a really good point, we don't want to throw out the older things that historically have worked and continue to work. And we've talked about the phone, but someone mentioned, writing a note. I mean, if you get something in the mail that is not a bill or a whatever, it's great. Charley?
Yeah, a little old-fashioned tip that I think a lot of younger people don't appreciate. On the spectrum of communication, the really great wins you want to celebrate, get everyone together somehow to celebrate those. It's a great time to connect with people. And on the other end of the spectrum, when it's a difficult conversation, don't do that in text of any sort. Like, have a real live conversation to work through it.
I think that's a new course that needs to be created. How to have those conversations now. Yeah.
And I just want to jump in too. I love Laura's note on the old-fashioned, handwritten note. And one of the things that we've done, especially like onboarding new employees in the midst of this, right, sending them a box with like branded gear and, a personalized note in there, or maybe something that is a favorite of theirs. We have college students who are graduating that will start in May, and just connecting with them and sending them small little tokens. I think in this, where you can't replace the physical connection that would occur from being face-to-face, lunches as well. Can you send a Grubhub or an Uber Eats or some kind of card that would allow them to still be able to eat with you while you're on that virtual call? Anything that I think you can do in the physical world to connect with that digital or virtual connection point is really good. So I love that point by Laura.
Yeah, great ideas.
I want to add one thing here with all this, like, we're throwing out all this advice and tools and stuff. Don't think that, that your leadership is going to figure out everything from themselves. And if you are a leader, don't think you have the burden of like going reading 1,000 books and just coming up with all these ideas. There are so many experts out there who are consultants in the space that we're always getting knocks on the door because we have a good SEO around culture management at OrgVitals, and I'm always sending them at consultants so they don't think they should just use our systems by themselves because they won't really understand how to even read this data and action it. So there are a lot of great consultants out there. We're happy to point you in those directions. I'll plug Oliver Group here as one here locally that certainly knows something about
Thank
this.
you, Charley. Thank you. Thank you. And, I want to give you guys each, a minute or so to say anything that is on your mind that you haven't said, but we have a couple of questions that I thought we would go to first. And one toward the beginning was around the change management required for all the change that's happening and it's coming at us. Anybody have any thoughts? And I'm not going to have each of you speak to this unless you want to, but just any thoughts on how to manage all of that change. So let's just say you're putting a new tool out there that everyone can use. How do you get that to be adopted? Things like that. Any ideas?
I can speak from a little experience, which is always pilot a new tool with a small group. And then before you deploy it widely, make sure, again, back to etiquette, you give everyone a sense of how to leverage it for value across collaboration. I'll let Gauri speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Charlie. I think that's something that we have definitely been doing. Fail fast methodology works really well, right? Because you don't want to invest in something that might not work. And especially in these times, right, where you don't know the use cases, you don't know a lot of times the sustainability. So definitely having that proof of concept for any tool to make sure you prove it out, and a quick POC too, not a 6 months long, right? I think that becomes the key factor in all of this, making sure that you fail fast and move on. And you know what, again, there's no silver bullet, right? The onus is on all of us to make this successful. And as you said earlier, it's not just leaders, it's all of us that need to work together to make this a success, because we are all in this together.
I love that. Yeah. And what I love too is just all this chatter from those who are participating and the ideas that are coming from everyone. And that's something that I've learned and talking with each of you. And then just to hear the questions and comments, we've got to keep this dialogue going. This is not one of those things that we're going to just figure out today and you're going to go away and have the few things in your notes, but this is just going to be something we're going to have ongoing conversation about. So we have just a few minutes left. So I just want to throw it out to you guys to share anything else that, that you have in your notes that you think is really important for everyone to hear. Please feel free to do that now and I'll wrap up.
Sometimes less is more. We're talking about adding more layers on in terms of systems and tools and habits. And oftentimes when you bring in a good consultant, the first thing they're going to do is start asking why. Remove some processes, remove some tools. Let's really boil things down to the essence and be more intentional about the time we're spending across these elements.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is just kind of the role of leadership. It doesn't always fall to the leaders, right, to either come up with the ideas or suggestions or run with them. And I think the more that you can empower people to do that, there was actually an interesting report that Microsoft put out actually within the last month about virtual work. And one of the things it talked about was during the past year, the disconnect between leaders and individuals, right? So one of the questions they asked them was, do you feel like you were thriving or just surviving, right? And the only segment of the workplace population that felt like they were thriving were leaders. And it really kind of just demonstrated the disconnect that exists between leadership and individuals' day-to-day experiences. So I would say, lean in. If you are a leader, lean into listening and really pushing out or empowering your people to do what's best for your team.
I found that too in lots of surveys that we've done too, is that leaders seem to think things are better than others do in the organization. So it's something to at least be aware of. Gauri, bring us to the close.
Absolutely. So 2 things, right? One is having a growth mindset is going to be the key, and trust. The mutual trust that leaders have in their employees is going to be the key to success. think especially as you're remote and you have to be flexible. There are times where you have to go pick up your kids or do whatever, right? But hey, that mutual trust is what is going to make us all successful and take us the long way. Yeah. So building that mutual trust is the key for success.
You guys are awesome. I mean, this is the benefit of getting lots of minds together and sharing lots of great information. I have learned so much, even though I've talked to each of you. And so thank you for your vantage points of bringing that. And let's everyone keep the conversation going. But for now, we'll kind of table it until the next time. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.